Hi, Otto here for Bavarian Autosport. Today we're going to be replacing control arms and control arm bushings on a typical BMW 3 Series or a Mini. Let me remind you that everything you see in the video today is available in our online store at BavAuto.com. Also, don't forget to visit our tech blog site at blog.bavauto.com, friend us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. That's BavAuto on Twitter. With that, let's take a look at some of the parts that we might be touching today. We have the various different control arms for different models and from different brands that we offer for the control arms. Similarly, we have different bushings available from stock to various upgrades in rubber and urethane. We also offer the bushings already mounted in the bushing mounting brackets. That'll allow us to do this job at home in the driveway without a hydraulic press. Otherwise, we would need a press to press the bushing into the bracket. If we purchase it with the bracket already on, we can just do this at home. We have our control arm bushing removal and replacement tool. That's to take the bushing off of the end of the control arm and reinstall the new bushing. We have our sway bar links, which we will be touching, and if they need replacement, now's a good time to do it. Some of the tools besides the control arm bushing removal and replacement tool, we have our mechanical lubricant spray, we have our Bentley manual, and we have our safe grip gloves. With that, let's get to the video and see how easy this job is to do. All right, now here we are under the vehicle. We're ready to remove the passenger side control arm. Now I have prepped this before starting by spraying the mechanical penetrant on each of the threaded studs for the ball joints and the sway bar control link. So the nut at the top here for the inner ball joint, the nut for the outer ball joint, and let's see, the bracket for the sway bar link and the other end for the sway bar link up here. We're going to be replacing this sway bar link. So we'll be removing the inner ball joint, the outer ball joint, disconnecting the sway bar link, and then removing the bushing here, the two bolts on the bushing. With that, we'll put the mechanical aside and we'll grab our safe grip gloves and we'll get to work. All right, now as the first order of business, we're going to disconnect the control arm bushing. I'm going to show you how to remove and replace just a control arm bushing without removing the control arm, in case that's all you need to do is replace the bushing. So we'll show that first, then we'll physically remove the arm to replace that. So we have the two bolts here. I have a 17mm socket. Okay, and then we should be able to just pull that off like that. So now we'll get the control arm bushing removal and replacement tool to pull the bushing off the end of the arm. We've got our, this is the removal tool. We have the kit, which has the removal tool and the installation tool together to pull the bushing back on afterwards, and we'll show you that. So the removal tool here slides over the end of the control arm, and the threaded bolt or press goes right up against the end of the control arm pin like this. Now you can use hand tools, or we're going to use an air tool. This is just faster. The hand tools using a ratchet is just fine and works very well. Couldn't be much easier than that. Now, upon installation, if all we were doing is replacing the control arm, we would have our pre-mounted bushing and control arm bracket together. We just use the tool to press it back on, and we're all done with this side. Very easy to do. Now you can buy these bushings either as just the bushing alone or the bushing with the bracket. The positive point in buying the bushing with the bracket is that you don't need a hydraulic press. If you were just to replace the bushing only, you do need a hydraulic press to push this bushing out and put your new bushing in place. That's why we offer these together as a kit. The bushing and the bracket all pressed together, ready to go for you to just install on the car. We'll be installing that, but now, since we are removing the complete control arm, that comes first, then we'll show you the installation. All right, now in preparation for getting the arm off the car, first I'm going to disconnect the sway bar link. The easiest way to do this to begin with is just take the nut off here on the sway bar link bracket, leave the bracket with the link. If we're not replacing the sway bar link itself, on the new arm, we'll just put the bracket through and mount it to the arm. We do need this bracket for the new arm either way. Okay, so there's our nut. That's a 17 millimeter on this vehicle. Now, if you have a E36 M3 or an E46 3 Series or an E30 M3, the sway bar link will not go down to the control arm. The sway bar link will go up and connect to the strut, so we don't even have this to disconnect. We don't have to touch it. All right, now we will loosen the nut on the outer ball joint, then we'll do the nut on the inner ball joint. This outer one on this vehicle is a 19 millimeter. Now this is fairly tight. We're going to use the double wrench trick, which we lock a wrench into, I can get it here, into the other wrench to lengthen it. Now this is fine, but you do need to be careful. Put it over that arm and run against here. Use two hands, one here, one here. Gives you a lot more torque. Okay, now I've removed this nut fully. Now I'm ready to get the nut on the inboard. Now this one's a little bit more difficult. Clearance is tight. The driver's side is worse than the passenger side. But 22 millimeter on this particular vehicle. We'll get the wrench up on the nut. And I'm going to use the double wrench torque adder, let's call it, again. Since I can't even get to the end of the wrench in the position it's at. So we're going to pull and loosen. There we go. Now, this one can be tedious. We're going to have to just go about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of a turn at a time until the nut is off. Now in some cases on the driver or the passenger side, you can actually get the nut from above with a socket, a universal, and a long extension to be up above the engine. This particular one, there's a bracket in the way and we can't do that. So we do have to do it from the bottom, and we'll have to do it manually and just keep going till it's done. We'll come back after this nut's removed. All right, here's the inner nut. Took a while to get off, just turning the wrench one flat at a time on the nut, but it's off, it's done. We couldn't put a socket up through the top because the exhaust pipe's in the way. But this is ready to remove. Now, there's a couple of ways we can remove a control arm, and what we're doing is separating ball joints. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. One is non-destructive and one is destructive. We'll show you the non-destructive and we'll try that first, even though we are replacing this arm. If the non-destructive works, it's actually easier. So we're going to use a large short handle sledge, and we're going to beat on the knuckle for the ball joint. Now, when I say the knuckle, that's the part the ball joint spindle goes through. You can't see this on the camera right now, but the part of the strut that the ball joint goes up through. So the part of the strut, let's consider that's my fist. And the ball joint is my finger. The ball joint's going in, sticking out the top, and the nut would be there. I'm going to hit the hammer on my knuckles. So follow the strut down, the casting, right here, above the end of the control arm. That's where I'm going to hit with the hammer. I'm going to set up a vibration, which will hopefully release the ball joint. Here we go. Just get yourself a good clearance. Right here is where we're going. And don't be timid. All right, Now, that hasn't released yet, but there's no downward pressure on this at all. So what we're going to do is insert a pry bar, apply downward pressure, in other words, separating pressure. If the ball joint were going the other direction, we'd pry upward. And we're going to do the same thing again. So now we have our pry bar in between the control arm and the bottom of the strut. There we go. And we're separated. Now we'll do the same thing on the inboard. The difference being we don't have really any place to hit except for the sheet metal framework, and that won't transmit the same vibrations. So on the inboard, we're actually going to hit on the housing, the cast housing on the control arm for the ball joint in order to do the same thing. All right, now we're ready to go with releasing this inboard joint. I'm going to hit the hammer here. I have threaded on the nut on the outside joint, just enough to hold it so that when this releases, the whole arm doesn't fall to the floor. There we go. That's loose. Now I'm going to remove the other nut and pull the whole thing down. There we go. So here's our inboard joint. The nut was up on the top. You can see the taper here. That's what we were releasing with the hitting. And our outboard joint, same thing. There's the taper and the nut goes on the top. Now we're ready to install the new arm.